The timer module is a fundamental component in the architecture of nearly every modern microcontroller, serving as a critical tool for time-based operations. In fact, almost all contemporary microcontrollers, whether simple baseline models, mid-range variants, or advanced devices, come equipped with at least one timer module. Let's begin by analyzing the timer module of the MSP430 microcontroller. The timer module is composed of a clock, a comparator, and a counter. When the counter reaches the configured threshold, an interrupt is triggered. The basic timer module has a couple of configurations and 3 clock sources. The timer can be configured as a single counter. The basic timer module has a couple of configurations and 3 clock sources. The timer can be configured as a single counter, where only one counter is working and the threshold is reached, an interrupt is triggered. By using only one counter, we have an 8-bit timer, since only one counter is doing the work. The basic timer can also be configured as a cascaded timer, where basically the first counter is connected to the second counter. The first counter starts the count. Then, when it reaches maximum value, it increments the second counter. When the second counter reaches the threshold that was configured, an interrupt is triggered. This allows for a larger count, since we have a 16-bit counter instead of an 8-bit counter. The basic timer module has 3 clock sources to select from: the ASIC-LK source, the SM-CLK source, and the cascaded source. This is used to configure the timers in a cascaded manner. By using this configuration, we are getting a 16-bit timer. In order to configure the timer, you have to write the correct values to the configuration register. You have to configure the clock source by using the correct combination of bits from the table. You have to select the interrupt interval and make sure the timer is enabled by clearing the whole bit when you have decided the desired configuration and know the values you have to write to the register. You can configure your timer and start using it. Let's look at a practical example using the basic timer from the MSP430. Here we have our base address for the timer. We have also defined a macros that will allow us to convert an address to a pointer variable. We then write the configuration value to the configuration register and reset the counter to 0. Then we configure the interrupts so the microcontroller triggers an interrupt every time the timer triggers one. In the MSP430, we need to define a function that will be called every time there is an interrupt. In this code, we are designing a function called basic timer ISR, and this function is mapped to the basic timer interrupt. Every time the timer triggers an interrupt, this function is called. And we also clear the interrupt flag in the timer and wait for the next interrupt to occur. This is the basic of how the timer works and how you can configure it.